Hi, wasn't that great? Managing adult students who control a lesson. And as you heard, he ends up back at claiming territory and a few of other of the biggie conversations that he brings up. And this is so typical. Almost all of these issues come back to claiming territory, request versus requirement, long-term relationship. And the thing is that these types of situations that this teacher found herself in, they can evolve almost invisibly over time, just in little pieces. It's kind of like when your kids are in a growth phase and you see your children every day, right? And so you don't necessarily notice the changes, but when you run into somebody that you haven't seen in a couple of months, they might make a comment. Oh my gosh, you look so much more grown up. And then you're like, oh, yeah, they do. It just kind of happened so invisibly that you didn't notice the little tiny changes. And so that can happen in your lessons when someone is just taking little bite-sized pieces of territory, and it tends to build over time and maybe snowball. And once you realize where it's gotten you, not to worry, all is not lost. You can gain back your territory and your control. Um, but you have to be willing just to have an open, honest conversation with the student. And it helps if you just remind the student, look, I only want the very best results for you. That's what you're paying me for. And I have to ask you to trust me sometimes. And it might mean, you might need to let go of some of your ideas about what's best and how you think it should be going, because you don't know where this is going. So again, here's another phrase that I came up with, and I use it a lot when I have these kinds of situations. If I have someone that is just insistent that, I need to take extra notes, I'll forget, or whatever the case may be, I like to say, look, are you willing to consider the possibility that your brain is capable of more than you think it is? Or whatever, are you willing to consider the possibility that you can remember this much information between the time you leave the lesson and the time you get home? Are you willing to consider the possibility that fill in the blank? If they're not, then, that's fine. But I think that at least that puts the ball in their court, and it communicates pretty clearly that you're not going to back off. And if you're not even willing to consider that it might work, then I really can't help you. Now, in the studio support section was the audio on evolving larger shared lessons. And I hope at the very least you're considering teaching shared lessons, because it truly is more effective for the student. But I hope that this kind of put you at ease a little bit if you're nervous about trying to gather that many students in the beginning, and then how to manage that situation. So if you are unsure, then consider starting out with, maybe a couple of private students, but also with some small groups, just 2 students or 3 students. And then it is advantageous to you because you get you get used to managing just a few students. But then if you've got some together that are clearly not a good match with regard to the pace of their learning, then you've got some other smaller classes that maybe you could combine and reconfigure. And in the business support, um, Neil talks about teaching all year. He talked about, bringing that cultural shift around regarding what we expect. So most people are just expecting that they're not going to be taking lessons during the summer. I have always taught year round because this is my main source of income, and I can't afford to take the summers off. So my families have always just worked with me. They just know what to expect because I tell them everything right up front. But of course, it's still okay to choose a summers off schedule if that's what works best for you. And I think a successful cultural shift would be that year-round lessons are simply seen as another typical option, but not an unusual request. But isn't it wonderful that you can create the precise schedule that suits you? What hours you want to teach, what months you want to teach. You can take your vacations whenever you want. So let's get a head start on planning your typical teaching year. And to help you out with this, I created a worksheet in this lesson for you to download to help you kind of think it through and plan it out a little bit. So download that and work through that. And we can talk about that on our live coaching call.